everybody for coming to listen to the presentation today. As Eric said, my name is Mike Kaptic. I'm the Director of Student Housing out at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. I've been in my role for 4 years, and in my current role, I basically cover all aspects of housing operations ranging from maintenance, res life, fiscal, personnel, information technology, housekeeping, food service, and construction projects that we're dealing with.
Hi, good afternoon if you're in the Midwest like I am. My name is Cheryl Lyons, Director of Residence Life at Ohio State, and I have been the director for about 3 years, but my role has changed dramatically over my time, and we'll get into some of that later. My main responsibilities include the day-to-day residence hall staffing and the assessment for all of the Residence Life units, as well as for a brief time I also was in charge of our housekeeping models, and we take care of all of our learning communities, both for the Columbus campus, and we also have housing on 3 regional campuses. And so part of what we decided to do today was offer this webinar up, and it is a modification of a presentation that we were able to give at GLACUHO recently. And the genesis of the idea to give this program at all was that after the first year of my experience as a director, I decided that it might be instructive and helpful to my staff if I put together some details on what it was that I was learning in my job, and to share with them what I didn't realize that I would need to know, or what I was going to be experiencing, so that they would get a little bit of an insight into what it's like to be a director. And so that's how we've kind of evolved, and I think the addition of Mike to the presentation has been very valuable, because as I was an internal promotion, Mike was able to do a search and seek out his promotion to another campus.
So our goals for today's session is obviously to discuss the director's role and to examine what professional preparation would be helpful for anybody looking to make that next jump to any director level position, and the strategies you might be able to take to gain greater experience in your current role and in your current situation to prepare you for your future. And then also to provide insight into sort of what Cheryl and I have called non-apparent leadership position expectations and some of the hidden elements that you might be facing when you make that jump from the mid-level to the director level. So really, what's the director role in the position description? When you think about our housing enterprises, there may be various director configurations and different things that fall under different directors. So overall, when you look at the housing aspects of that we might be facing with, you might be supporting academics, you might be directly involved with facilities, residence life, the fiscal, business, and personnel side, and you may also have dining under your job description. You know, the real question that you're going to need to ask yourself is, are you currently prepared for that future job, and how can you get those skills, and how do you break down the silo walls that many of our organizations have, where res life does res life, but facilities does facilities. And ultimately, one of the questions that you have to ask yourself is, how do you direct all of these facets when maybe you only have had an experience that gives you 20% knowledge of the total housing operation?
So one of the things that we thought we'd start off with is for you to really reflect on what you think a director job is, or what a director really does. And this is going to vary widely in the type of institution, the size of the department, what the scope is. And so whether it's your own maybe director or one that you've worked with in the past, you can kind of spend some time thinking or writing down, what is it that you think that these people do all day? What is it that they're spending their time doing when you don't see them in a meeting, maybe for staff meeting or at a presentation? And then I think one of the really interesting parts is to go through the position from the viewpoint of the different constituencies that a director role serves. So for example, What is it that a student group or students individually expect from directors? Maybe they expect them to be speakers at events, or a mentor for you, as a student to go into student affairs, or they want directors to be supportive of the ideas that they have. They may also see directors as people that they don't have a common viewpoint with. They might see you as power, they might see you as policy, and they might not have a positive view. Go through and think about the people in the department. What do they expect from a director? Do they expect visionary leadership? Do they expect a strong authority figure? Do they expect someone to come in and fix the problems that they have? What about the rest of the wider campus? The student affairs division, the academic side of the house, the faculty. What is it that maybe the town gown expectations are for the director role? These also are very complex and could be lengthy. And then what about the supervisor of the director job? That might be something to consider as well. What is it that they're hiring you for, to help them do their work better, or for them to have you keep what's on your plate off of their plate? So I think just checking your impressions about director roles first and foremost can help you figure out where you need to be. Now, what we want to do is go take a look at what kind of preparation you're going to need if you want to think about aspiring for a director level in housing, and what kinds of experiences you might be able to get on your resume. And we're used to this kind of dialogue in our profession, looking at our resumes and deciding what we may or may not have. But here are some things that you might want to consider. Let's go way back and think about why you got into housing or student affairs in the first place. What is it about that work that appealed to you? The student contact, perhaps, the ability to plan programs, whatever it might have been that made you really excited about wanting to go to work. Thinking about whether or not those facets will continue to be in your roles as you aspire to more promotion. Why do you want to move up? Often, since we're used to academic systems where the very next goal is laid out for you, I got my undergrad, now I'm going to get my graduate degree, and so forth and so on. We get used to the idea that we just need to move up. But as we all know, it gets harder and harder to move up as there are fewer and fewer positions in the pyramid, and so you need to decide when you're going to try to move up, is that the right fit for you to move up directly, or is there another option for you to continue your career ascension? And what type of institution or department is going to fit best for you? Maybe you've worked in several different kinds, and as you think about being the director, does the size matter for you? Is it important that you're at a smaller institution where you have a wide scope, or would you rather be at a larger institution where you might have a more narrow focus? It's also important to remember what changes in your role from one level to the next. For me, personally, going from even an associate director to a director, your roles and relationships change with the people that you work with. You become much more limited in who you can see as a peer and who you can hang out with and, share the gossip with, because things become much more political. So you have to think about what kind of changes you're going to experience when you get to that director level. And then finally, think about the different roles that are in university administration and student affairs, and think about whether or not you're limiting yourself too narrowly. Perhaps there's a very exciting job in another type of department or another construction of student work that might be just as rewarding, that might help you keep some of the reasons why you went into the field, and not just think, okay, well, I'm an associate director, now I must be a director. So let's talk about developing your foundation. Where do you start? Okay, you have some things on your resume, you have your obvious roles and responsibilities in your current position. How can you start to think about broadening your scope so that you can have these reflective, reflective thought processes about where you want to go, and try to feel out what might be a future option for you? Well, the first thing to think about is mentors and colleagues. How can you pick the brain of people that are doing work that might be interesting to you but that you've never really spent any time talking with them in any detail? Go out and have those informational, conversations over coffee. Pick their brain about what their experiences are like. Also spend some time assessing your strengths and weaknesses. And these might not be the common things that you think about. Well, I know how to present, I can run a staff meeting, I can do judicials, but rather it might be as I learned by becoming a director, wow, I've never been on camera for the media before. Maybe you could get someone to do some role playing with you with a video camera and give you some pointers on how you could get some feedback and do better in that way. So looking at strengths and weaknesses that maybe you aren't readily thinking about now, like have you ever had to roll out a vision for a large group and get them all to buy in? How do you examine that process and see if there's a way to build it into your current job? Looking for advice from people who've been through the job search process to be directors is really helpful. You know, anyone that you can talk to in a professional association to just network and get all the advice that you can is really going to be helpful.
One of the other things you can do is really sit down and assess your skill set. And one of the things that both Cheryl and I recommend is that you almost do the brainstorm everything resume first, where you just sit down and you look at your total experience as a professional and just start writing everything that you've done. And then after you have sort of that giant list of everything that you've done, start looking at job postings and see what are the skill sets that people are looking for in terms of the future step up. If you're looking for a director, what are different schools looking for? And you'll see trends and similarities between different frameworks of size, different mission statements, different values, and you'll start to be able to tailor what you need to devise as your skill set with the type of institution that you might want to work at. Obviously, you're not going to want to submit your brainstorm resume to the position. You're going to want to tailor it down from that large-scale total brainstorming process. But it's a good way for you to start saying, where are the holes in my experience with the next place that I need to go? And looking at the job postings is a good way to start defining that. I think some of the other things that you can look at, do you need to further your education? I think there's a presentation, or there's always presentations of should I do a PhD or should I not do a PhD? I've had colleagues and mentors talk very specifically about if you want to be a director at housing, MBA might be a thing that you want to do. Based on my experience and based on the amount of time I've spent with accountants and auditors, I needed to learn more about accountant language, and an MBA may be something that I look at further. But other people may feel that they want to go the PhD route. I think it ultimately depends on, you know, what you feel is your role at your institution, and also what would benefit you for furthering your education. I think one of the things that you can do is, working within your current position, is identifying those holes and working with your supervisor to see, are there committees that I can become a part of that will fill those gaps? Are there collaborations with other offices on campus? Are there different things that you can do? I've worked at an institution in the past where they would allow us to do summer internships within student affairs so that we could gain experience across different experience path lines. And then obviously there are plenty of other places that you can build your knowledge set. When you go to conferences, don't go to the sessions that you're immediately drawn to. Go to the sessions where you don't know anything about that topic. Search out webinars, search out certification processes, and GLACUHO has a great number of institutes that they have and separate conferences during the course of the year and the summer, which will gain more information and broaden not only your knowledge but your mentoring network, and I think that those are important things to look at. One of the other areas that Cheryl and I talked about was what are the readings that you can use to help you not only during your job but before your job, the pre-planning. And so we have a bunch of books that we've read and have helped us in some way. We won't go into the specifics, but later on in the PowerPoint there are bullet points about what the different books have helped with. Some are more theory-based and some are more based on you know, how you can work with building your team, how you can work with difficult people, how you can develop that vision and that mission, and how you can have a game plan right from the get-go when you start your new role to make sure that you follow that plan as you're developing and assessing your new position. Oh, sorry, Cheryl.
It's okay. So we're going to talk, the next part is really let's get into the juicy stuff. Let's get into what it's really like to be a director. What are the things about the positions that, we watch directors in their roles do before us, but we really didn't have any idea about the kind of hidden expectations or hidden elements of the leadership role that we were then exposed to once we got into our roles. So for the next slide, what is being a director really like? The first thing that really I wanted to talk to my staff about, and I mentioned, is that it really does often feel like a peerless position. There isn't, at this very large institution that I work at, another director of residence life. And so it's hard sometimes to say, wow, I just wish I could sit down with somebody and pick their brain on how they might handle this problem. And that's where networking comes in. That's where, your regional or your national associations and being able to find people at your same level where you can call them up and say, okay, I've got this staffing issue, or I'm thinking about reorganizing, but if you said it to anyone in your team, they'd freak out. So you need someone outside of your organization to be able to pick their brain. The other thing that's kind of a new reality for being a director is the phrase of it's all your responsibility, or depending on who's telling you, it may just be all your fault. And so it's one thing to be in the safety and the cradle of a large organization when something hits the fan. Maybe it's a large crisis, whether it's a student issue like a sexual assault or a security issue. Maybe it's a large issue on the campus that pops up about race, or maybe there's a vast power outage. Whatever the case might be, there's always that sense of, oh, I've got someone above me that's going to help me through whatever happens. And once you're a director, really a lot of that responsibility falls to you to lead and to help people feel like they have what it takes to get through something that might be very challenging. And sometimes people aren't going to like how things are handled, or they're going to say, well, if there's something wrong in housing, it must be Mike's fault, or it must be Cheryl's fault, and they're responsible for fixing it. So that can sometimes bring a little bit of stress. And I should give a caveat here that as we go through these, Mike and I both really like our jobs, but we want to be realistic with people about how there can be some challenging days to being a director. You have to have all the right answers and all the answers. In my first year as a director, I couldn't believe how many times people just expected me to have opinions, and well thought out, educated opinions on things that I hadn't spent a lot of time paying attention to. Coming up through a traditional residence life background, you might not spend a lot of time thinking, well, what's my opinion on door monitoring systems, or how do I feel about Blackboard, or what is it that I think we should do in our next strategic plan regarding our learning communities? And so oftentimes you're put in the place of, well, you're the housing expert, so what's your take on this? And you have to be able to spend some time in that role looking at best practices and formulating opinions on things that you normally don't pay attention to, and you can start doing that right away. The buck stops here again. Being responsible, but also for me it's about holding the careers of people in your hands, being ultimately responsible for job offering, for staff decision making if people aren't doing well in their roles, to helping people with their salary negotiations. All of these things are things that you don't quite often get a chance to play around with until you're in that director role. But there may be ways you can have conversations to learn more about those types of experiences with others. And then the last one I'm going to talk about on this slide is, am I really working in housing? And for a lot of directors, I've heard it from my own CHO as well as in my role, and even from Mike, sometimes you spend so much time working with your partners in other student affairs or student life offices, or you work strongly with other people around the institution, or you're dealing with troubleshooting on a large level, that you sometimes think, wow, I would just love to spend some time with my own staff and work in housing on housing type things. But really your focus becomes much more about what's up and what's out when you're in a director type role.
I think one of the other things that I found in my experience is I generally like to brainstorm with staff, and I like to ask questions both from a pure, let's see what the different avenues can be, but I learned very quickly that sometimes my thinking out loud became gospel with my staff, that if we had a discussion of, hey, what do you think about X? Suddenly, through the chain of command, X was becoming the direction that we were going in, even though I may have been purposely serving having a conversation more to look for devil's advocate positions if I was looking at leaning in one direction or another. I think the other thing that you realize very quickly is you lose the shield that was your director and you become the shield. So when you're taking on all of the complaints about housing or there's questions about housing, you have to learn to change over from realizing that your skin is going to have to become a little thicker to have certain things just flow off of you. But also you're becoming that shield that you need to be transparent with working with your staff, but you don't necessarily need to be sharing every time there's a complaint or working to figure out what's the best way to improve your staff without necessarily saying, okay, well, we've gotten a complaint about this. There's different ways of doing things. I think, one of the other areas is control without control. Your upper administration will expect that you know everything about everything that is going on in your department. So figuring out ways, one, to be informed, but also not to be getting in the way of letting your staff do their jobs. Sometimes the art of being a good director is also knowing when to get out of the way to let your staff flourish and explore different modes of the way we're going to operate. So it's important to be kept informed, but not kept so informed that you automatically are creating too much of a micromanaging situation. And I think that the other thing is to realize is that you are going to have to look at your leadership style and the way you want things to potentially operate, but also look at what does the department need and what do the players in the organization allow you to accomplish. And so you may have to choose to change your style in order to meet and get the most out of different units or even different staff members. In my department, I have everyone is a union employee except for myself. And one of the things that's always different for me is that I'm dealing with 4 separate bargaining units and 4 separate bargaining agreements. So how I lead different groups, it potentially has to be situational based on what I'm allowed to do with the different agreements with my staff. So the next area that we want to kind of do is kind of break this down into a little further in terms of what are the areas that you need to prepare for. And so we're going to spend some time covering these 6 areas and looking about what you need to do to prepare yourself for some of these key leadership responsibilities.
Okay, so one of the first things that I really got into in becoming a director was the whole idea of visioning. And for some people, that's a dream, thing to do. Oh, give me a blank slate. I am all about creating vision. For other people, it's like pulling teeth. It's not enjoyable at all. And one of the things that's interesting about the whole visioning process, or trying to decide where it is that you want your department to go or what kinds of goals are important for you to accomplish, is, there's going to be a difference in how you are able to do that depending on if you were promoted from within or if you came in from the outside. Because for me, deciding that I might want to help shape a different direction for our department, I was one of them. And so not only is there an expectation from my boss that I'm going to lead us in a new direction, but I have to fight against people who assumed that they knew that I would stay the course. And then they were probably a little bit wrong about that, and then they were challenged by, well, Cheryl is one of us, and she understands why we do everything, so why would she dream about doing anything differently? Whereas externally you might be brought in to really shake the place up, or your expectation might be to maintain the status quo. I think what's important is that you come in, and if you have the time, to assess the landscape and see what's going well, what areas have some deficiencies or areas of opportunity, and look at also what your supervisor and maybe your important partners are saying about the department in terms of what they think might be opportunities to help shape where you're going in the next few years. A lot of what is difficult about this process is that it's one thing to do it on paper or in your head, and it's another thing to really manage that change. You know, most people aren't really that great about change. They think that they are, but then when you start to change maybe how they work, what their responsibilities are, maybe the whole org chart, then you get varying levels of buy-in, and people who get angry and emotions flare up, and you know, you can end up in a bad place for the morale kind of quotient in your department. And so I know I spent a lot of time not only looking at vision but also figuring out ways to help people manage their initial reactions to maybe avoiding change and then trying to move them forward together, you know, in a team mentality. I think that, you know, Mike brought up earlier just the whole idea of sometimes you have to learn when to step back or to not be in the middle of things. And I do think that when you're going through this process, sometimes your natural leadership tendencies might not be the best ones. And so again, I think that's where having good peers or mentors can help you to think about different ways to approach a management style that maybe you haven't been spending a lot of time in so far.
One of the areas that will also change is relationships and relationship building. And I think when you look at some of the relationships that you have, sometimes there may be slight differences between, as Cheryl has talked about, the internal versus the external. Obviously, if you're an external candidate that's coming into a department, you're trying to really assess you know, where your department wants to go, what the campus climate is, what the campus perception is of your department, and look at how you can foster and maintain current relationships, but also new relationships. For internal candidates, there may be some changes that need to happen in terms of going from a group that views everyone as colleagues to then supervising your in some cases friends, or like Sarl said, people that may feel that they know exactly what you are as an individual because they work alongside you. I think for me, being an external candidate, I spent a lot of time with my staff sitting down, and I did one-on-ones with every full-time staff member in the department and said, you know, what do you like about the department? What don't you like about the department? What do you want us to see change, grow? And then I did the same thing by cold calling a multitude of offices on campus and said, hey, I'm the new housing director. What's your view of student housing, and what would you like to see and change in terms of our relationship between your office and my office? And I think doing all of that legwork up front is a good way of building relationships long term, where now housing's not viewed as an island on campus, that it's an active partner. And that was one of the key things that I felt needed to happen on my campus to make sure that housing was maintaining its relationship as we were developing our relationship and growing and changing what we were doing. Another area that you have to pay key attention to is campus, local, and state politics. There will be a lot of people that at times will want to tell you how you need to operate your operation. It's amazing how many people feel that they're experts in housing. So you really need to understand what's going on and what's the dynamic. I think for me, one of the things that jolted me very early on in my first month was I was getting calls from state senators, and I actually got a call from the governor's office because people were complaining about student housing to their state legislature, and ultimately a mother had made it all the way up to the governor's office complaining about an assignment issue. So it's key to kind of figure out what the local dynamics are if you're moving from one campus to another, and really making sure that you're finding new avenues of support. Who's going to understand you? Who are going to be colleagues? Who are going to be mentors that will be able to help you through some of those times? And who can you go for a completely blank perspective of something? Because for some people, especially if you're an external candidate, people are like, well, that's just the way our campus is. And that doesn't necessarily help you sort of process how you need to change your leadership style or how you're going to change the operation in your mind when people are just saying, well, this is just the way it is, because sometimes this is just the way it is isn't necessarily the best thing for our students. In terms of taking ownership about your position, one of the key things that you need to do is really Can you handle all of the challenges? Are there things that you need to prioritize in terms of maybe the changes, or are there ways that you can use your supervisor to better help you not only shield the department, but in terms of understanding the impact of what's going to be down the line, and what are the different university dynamics? One of the key things that's important is to determine how does your university respond to problems and complaints, and how will that impact you? Do they understand what goes on in housing, the processes, or anytime a student complains, is there going to be an overreaction of an office outside of your purview, whether it's the Vice Chancellor's office or the President or the Chancellor's office? Are they going to immediately assume that the student's given them the full impact? So really making sure that you explain some of your processes to key constituents so that they understand when a student comes to complain, they have a better sense of what's going on in housing, but that they also understand that they can easily send the student back to housing to get questions answered, because I think we all at times know that now the mode of operation with maybe parents or students is they're just going to go to the top. They're not going to necessarily go and ask the people whom will be able to ultimately fix the problem. And I think one of the things that you have to do as a director with the final two bullets is, how are you going to handle when staff make grave errors? What kind of department feeling are you going to make in terms of people making errors, and how do you coach up your staff with different skill sets? Especially when you're coming in as an external candidate, you may have had sort of a feeling of, well, staff should be at a certain place in terms of their skill sets, and you may come in and realize that that's not the case. So how do you first make sure that you get the training in place to get staff where they need to be, but then also how do you train them over the long term to make sure that they can work with students or focused on students, but making sure that they really aren't worried about making the little error, it's the grave errors that you're trying to stress shouldn't occur.
I think a lot of the things on that slide, Mike, are just really applicable at any level that you're at. You know, you can start to think about how you handle someone not doing something well, even if you're a hall director and you're thinking about your RAs. You know, you can start thinking about how do you help prepare people for the next level, you know, at any level of the organization that you're at. And I think for my next two slides, the same things apply. You know, being the voice of an organization was kind of also a big change for me, because I'm not the kind of person that commits to mind lots of data and mission and vision statements and things like that. You know, they're all on my computer or on paper or on my wall over my desk. But once you become in charge of a department, you really do become the voice. And one of the things I started doing early on was collecting literally a file of data. You know, how many RAs do you have? How many hours of student employment do you have a year? How many, you know, housekeepers are in your operation? How many, you know, meals are you serving a week? All sorts of different kinds of tidbits that people, you know, call on you and want to know. And every time somebody asked me those questions, if I didn't know the answer before, I'd get the data together and put it at my fingertips, because you really kind of become a walking commercial for your unit and for your staff. And having good examples to pull out and share, you know, of great work that somebody on your team is doing whenever that right time presents itself is really important for being able to, you know, put your department forward as a, you know, as a department that's doing great things for students. You know, the expectation that you're the housing expert in the room is often, you know, the case. Well, how do you become a housing expert? I mean, you know, you could spend all day reading journals and the talking stick, you know, but you've got a long list of to-do items. So trying to figure out time in your schedule to be well read, and I think that you can start doing that now at any level that you're at. You know, making the time to pay attention to things in your professional development are really important. Also talking about how you have consistent messages. And this, again, is something that you can start doing even if you were a hall director. if you continue to repeat the same messages over and over again, people will start to copy them. They will start to also put them to voice. You know, when I say to the RAs in training 2 years in a row, it's important to me that you get beyond the door, get into people's rooms, sit down and have a conversation with them about what they're playing on their video game or what their fish's name is or whatever. And then I start to hear the hall directors use that same language, get beyond the door. It's really important, and it's actually one of the things I read in one of the books that's on the list, is what is important is repeated. So you need to repeat it in your own work, and you need to then hope that your staff will be picking up on those important messages and passing them along to their responsible parties that they have. And then another thing about the voice is, you know, I mentioned before the media thing. How do you practice that? How do you think about your work from a marketing point of view? How do you figure out what it is that you're selling? And how do you figure out how to respond to critique of how you're running the place? And again, you can apply that to what you might be doing right now if you're not a director. If a student doesn't like a decision that you or your staff member made, how do you articulate why you did that or why they did that? And how do you manage that, you know, kickback if you get it? I think one of the things that I've been doing recently is I've asked my hall staffs to start thinking about themselves as a CEO of their buildings, you know, or of their areas if they're an area manager or an assistant director, because it's easy to just respond to the latest student inquiry or sit and do your email and go to your meetings. But if you're setting goals and you are trying to figure out where you want your group to go, then you can start to be that voice for your group in all of the places that you are sitting in meetings and in communications. And I think that that's good practice for anyone. And then the next slide talks a little bit more about assessment of the vision that we talked about and being important to create a vision. Well, if you're in the director role, it's an expectation that you have a good idea of what the national assessments are out there that we can use. Do you know the difference between satisfaction and learning outcome-based measures? Are you in tune with what the institutional research office on your campus can offer you in terms of data? Have you any idea how much it costs to do an assessment plan for the year for your department? And, you know, how do you make sure that once you've laid out your vision and your strategic, you know, initiatives, how are you keeping your eye on the prize? It's easy to get caught up, you know, like it says here, in losing the trees in the forest. It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day crises of student work and the things that are constantly going to fill up your inbox, but how do you make sure that you're on track and keeping your team on track for what's the ultimate goal, what's the vision that you have put forward for them, and that people are taking the time and given the time to reflect and plan, you know, whether it's at semester break or quarter break or during the summers, during training, so that you're moving the place forward and not just putting out fires day to day.
Just jumping back, one other thing about the media, I think one of my recommendations is, especially as an external candidate, figure out what your media relations and your media policy is very early on in terms of what the expectation is of staff in terms of how much access the media has to you or how much access your communications people want to give the media to you. Coming from one institution that was very much a nobody talks to the media until communications addresses it or talks to folks, to coming to another institution where within the first month of me being on the job they said, we want you to go down to the morning news and have them interview you in the studio about being the new director of housing. There was huge differences, and also being able to talk with the media. How can you say something very concisely so that they can't cut your quotes or try to turn a story into something that it really wasn't? So it's really important that I think that that's one of the groups that when you come into the director role, you sit down with very early on and figure out what do they expect of you, and then what is the media climate in the town where your university is. Some other dangerous assumptions that we want folks to think about. Even though your staff may nod and say that, yeah, they get it, that they're all on the same page as you, you also have to understand that there is that power dynamic that's at play sometimes. And just because they say they get it doesn't mean that they get it. And so you have to continually go back and look at ways of how you're communicating both in large groups, small groups, and maybe one-on-one to get people to understand what your communication style is like and how you want people to interact with you. Just because you're the director doesn't necessarily mean you may not want people to ask questions or provide a devil's advocate perspective, and then ultimately you can say, okay, I've heard everything, but you want to create an environment where people feel comfortable expressing themselves. Now, as I said before, values that you took for granted in the past may not be what fellow staff believes in. It may either be that the current staff may want you to stick directly with what we've been doing, or you may actually find out that what staff believe in as an internal candidate may not actually be what the previous mission and the vision is, and they do want you to see the direction that you're going in. For external candidates, you may have a focus on certain things, and staff may be not on board when you initially come in, so you need to make sure that you figure out how to progress the vision of the department. Because you said so doesn't make it so sometimes, and there may be pushback in certain realms, and you need to sell your vision in a way that gets people on, and realize that you might need to be a little flexible in terms of what priorities you're going to stress and how long it's going to take for priorities to be accomplished based on the buy-in of your staff and your students, and in terms of making sure that you get to the direction that you want to go. I think it also depends on what your supervisor wants. I think for me, coming in as an external candidate, it was very important that I showed results and that I could show people that housing was able to accomplish the goals that were set forth either at the chancellor level or the vice chancellor level. So how do you blend all of those wants and needs in terms of your staff feeling that you're listening to them when your supervisor may be saying, you know, this is what needs to happen in housing, and it may be a rough sell sometimes. So you have to be an artist in terms of trying to get everybody to buy in, and sometimes get them to understand that the direction we're going in is the best direction, and not necessarily just simply sell it as, well, because I was told to do it in a certain way. You have to own the direction of the department and make sure that it's important that people say that you're on board, and it's not just simply because I was told to do it. Some final reflections. As Cheryl alluded to, in terms of some of the things that we've talked about will apply to other types of positions and different organizations. We don't think that this necessarily is just, well, these only apply to being a director. We think that you can take this back and use this at all different levels in terms of change management, and also what you're doing in terms of changing from one position to another. We think it's important that you don't get lost and solely focus on different key issues. You've got to do a balance of a balancing act of doing, measuring, selling, and educating in terms of doing those things continually to keeping your organization moving forward. And really what you want to do is transform how you lead now to prepare for the future. So whatever you can do to evolve your leadership style or allow yourself to be more flexible as a leader, when you walk into a new position, you can do all the assessing that you want in the world in terms of the interview process, but you're not going to know everything going in, because just as much as you're playing up your strengths and weaknesses as a candidate, sometimes organizations will do the same thing, and when you come in and truly get the chance to assess things on the ground, you may need to change on the fly to make sure that you're providing the direction and the vision for the department that the department really needs, not what the department really thinks it needs.
I think that one of the things that you can start practicing now, whether you're job searching or not even close to doing that, is to start practicing actually articulating why and how your position makes an impact. If your current job is to be an expert on your students or your residents or specific programs or facilities or staff, then figure out how to articulate why your job exists, what is important about it, what makes an impact in terms of your work, not just I'm here in case, we have 100 judicials and I'm going to process them, but what's the point? What is it that you're there to do, and be able to articulate the impact? Because one of the things we've learned is that the people above you may not know what you do to the detail that you do it, and how are you able to articulate that? I think, you know, look for the hidden knowledge that's out there, you know, the stuff that you don't know about the people that do the work in the positions above you. Listen between the lines. See if you can, you know, gain information from either your leadership or other mentors. Ask different questions than, well, what do you want to see on a resume for a, you know, a director? Ask them, what makes your job challenging? You know, what was your worst day and your best day as a director? What is it that you wish you had more time to do? You know, those are the types of things that are going to help you figure out what their job's really like day to day. You know, it's important to maintain your mentors and your cross-collaboration colleagues. You know, if there's an opportunity for you to get some collegial collaboration across the department that's not necessarily expected but might be welcomed in the environment that you work in, do it, because they're going to learn more about your work and you're going to have a better appreciation of theirs, and it's only going to pay dividends later. I think ultimately it's really just very important for you to start asking more questions. You know, you might go in, and I did with a past leader, and say, hey, we really like to get more budget experience. We know you kind of do it all. And their answer might be, well, sorry, I do it all because I do it all, and that's just the way it is. And so maybe you need to make friends with a business person or one of the accounting people and sit down and have them teach you, you know, how they read through the spreadsheets that they operate with, or you know, find a way to get some nuggets of information that you're not readily exposed to, and ask good questions so that you are positioning yourself just for more exposure than you're getting now in your current position to the new facets that you might be getting in your next position. Ultimately, I tell folks all the time, if you have everything that you need to do the next position that you're applying for, then maybe you're not really needing that one but the one above it. So you're never going to go into a job and have everything that they want you to have, but hopefully you'll be able to address how you can meet the needs and grow into that next position that is a good balance of challenge and, you know, for you to bring your talents to the table for that next job.
Cheryl?
Yeah, well, if you have any questions for us, here's our email. And then I think we'll also click through kind of just so you can see what's in there for our resources that we summarized for you in terms of the books and kind of the key points in the books that we were sharing as well. But if there are any questions out there, we'd be glad to take them. I feel like we ran through that pretty quickly. So.
Sure, Cheryl, we have one question that came in. In 6 words, what is your advice for aspiring directors? And I guess this wasn't necessarily directed at just you, but either Cheryl or Mike.
6 words. I guess for me it would be learn to articulate your student impact.
I think that that's perfect. So I think I would agree with Cheryl in terms of making sure that your focus is on making sure how you articulate things is important.
Great. Another question came in. With respect to working for private housing agencies, do you think that there are different expectations and pressures for directors of private housing agencies on a college campus? Is the demand greater? Can you provide some examples?
I think that I've not served in terms of that kind of relationship. I know that we had a relationship initially with one of our buildings, and then we wound up managing it. Obviously, it'll depend on the relationship with the university. It'll also depend on different aspects of what the company's focus is in terms of bottom line. Are there enough heads in the beds? And how do you balance the business aspects with the educational aspects? So I think it'll be case by campus and case by case with the different organizations and the different businesses.
Sure, I think some of them are very student-centered in terms of their policies and their relationships, and others are very much, privatized kind of apartment-type complexes. I think it's just important to assess that when you're looking. But I do think that even for, state institutions, money becomes very important, and if you are in a place where they are talking about building and or talking about making budget in the time of cuts, being able to both say, okay, I'm a student educator and I'm going to develop students and that's the purpose of my work, but to also be able to translate your impact in terms of numbers, both budget numbers, damage numbers, occupancy numbers to the people above you that really only care about the bottom line. You have to be able to learn to do both.
A couple other questions as well. What do you think has been the best part of your job, and what didn't you see coming?
I think for me, when I interviewed for my position and I was interviewing with who is my current supervisor now, I said, really, this is a put up or shut up position, because for a lot of us, we're moving up the chain and we're like, oh, I could do that job. Oh, I could do that. I could do that. And when you get into the role and you say, okay, I can really do it, and I feel like the changes that I've made from an organizational standpoint, that I'm getting faculty members, I'm getting other administrators coming and going, thank you for the work that you've done in housing and thank you for the change that you've made, and I'm getting students saying the same thing. Those are the moments where you reflect on all of the positives that you've done. For me, the challenge has been sometimes the external focus on housing, because people were already looking at it as a department that needed to improve. Sometimes there's a focus to go back and look at the negative and bring up old news stories from from me being here. I'll give you an example. We just finished a renovation of our freshman towers, and so we did the building dedication. And one of the media outlets, rather than focusing on all of the changes that we made, went back to news footage from 2006 to talk about security and talk about these things. And rather than focus on, hey, we've made all of these changes so much better, it was kind of like, well, they made all these changes because this is how bad it was. And sometimes working with the media has been a challenge for me, because I feel like it's not about lifting the university up. The culture sometimes is about the gotcha. And that sometimes has been hard for me to not only work as an individual, but also work to help the staff understand that and to say, okay, just let these things go, but doing a good job of being proactive out in the media to say, no, our department is really working to help students and improve students' experiences.
I think what I didn't see coming was that shortly after getting my director role, my supervisor would abruptly leave the university. And since then, every single leadership member between my job and the president has turned over. And so the vast amount of change that leadership turnover brings was something I didn't really see coming. I think that the best part of my job has kind of come out of that, which is that we have been able to go from a place where the morale was low and people were feeling like, oh, now what's going to happen next and what's our new expectation going to be, and just a lot of fear for people's jobs, and to kind of move the organization forward to seeing again a better culture of people, grads wanting to apply to full-time jobs, and students saying, hey, I think I want to go into student affairs because of my great experience in housing, and having positive relationships with, our RHA, and just kind of the warm, fuzzy things that come out of having a more positive culture, but really getting through all that organizational change was quite the slog. And so for me, I think we're really having a great time at this point, and that's the best part, is really starting to be able to see the fruits of your labor, like Mike said.
Yes, thank you very much. I think we are out of time for questions, but as the presenters mentioned, if you do have specific follow-up questions, please feel free to contact them at their email addresses, which are on the screen. At this time, I want to invite Anne-Marie or Lori, if they have any announcements for the group. They can unmute themselves and give us any announcements they may have.
Can you hear me, Eric?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for coming to our webinar, and I want to especially thank Cheryl and Mike. I sort of accosted them after this last GLACUHO conference and said, please, please, please consider doing this session for us. So thank you very much to both of you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Of course. Just another brief reminder that applications for our Professional Development Institute, or PDI, are due this Friday, December 10th. It's a really worthwhile opportunity. It's sort of set up like a National Housing Training Institute where we take different topical focuses, and it's really geared towards folks with 3 to 5 years of professional experience. So if you have questions about that, please shoot me an email, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Please check out our GLACUHO website, www.glacuho.org, for additional updates as well as upcoming webinars. And if you are still interested in being involved in a committee, please contact me, and I can direct you to Lisa Ortiz to get you on one of our 9 committees. That's it. Thanks, Eric.